When I'm styling the hairs at the top of the head, once again, I'll just work with the guide hairs before moving into the render hairs. And it's a little bit easier to work with the selection here. I'm going to start by taking almost all of the tips, just the tips at the top of the head, this one included, and I'll comb them back along the negative z-axis. Let me just grab this hair as well. I missed a hair. So I'll come back along the negative z-axis, and on some of these additional hairs, I'll do a bit of a puffing. Just so my hair can stand a little higher at the front of the head. So again, just trying to avoid that penetration with the skull object. And for the hairs at the back of the head, enter tip mode. I'll grab the remaining hairs. Just hold down Shift. And I'll actually leave out these two hairs here. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to scale these hairs down. These are going to form the short hair at the back of the head. So maybe even these hairs back here, these bottom 6, I'll leave as is. I'll do a comb along the negative y-axis to grab this hair here. Do a standard recomb just to push the hair out. And for the hairs at the bottom, I'll enter tip mode, grab all of those hairs, make sure I've accounted for all of them, scale them down. And now that I've got their size appropriate, I can comb them along the negative y-axis and do a puff. I'll do a little bit of translation on them just to give them a bit of curl at the end. And what I'll do is taper off these other hairs so that as the hair moves closer to the bottom of the neck, they slightly shrink in scale. So we're just kind of layering almost like a hairdresser would. These hairs that are in the middle of the head, middle of the back of the head, I'll make them a little bit longer, scale them out a little longer. I'll pull them in a little tighter. I'll do the same thing on these 3 hairs, make them a little longer for some overlap. Pull them in a little bit. And do a little bit of scaling here as well. Do a puff at roots, just to lift them up off the head. And I'll finish off with the hairs at the top of the head, the guides. Work with these 5 hairs, scale them out a little longer, and do a little bit of restyling and puffing. Scale here. And a puff. If you ever need to move hairs from the roots, you can select the hairs, and if you select hairs by the strand, you actually select the entire strand and you can move the hair from its base. So you can create some nice volume to the hairs by thickening up the angle of the strand. Okay, if I look at my hairs in render hairs mode now, I'll press enter. I want to look at 100% of the hairs, and if I had 20,000 hairs on the side of the head, I'm probably going to want about 60,000 hairs on the top of the head. I'll switch into render hairs mode. And we can see how our hairstyle has turned out. It's a little bit flat along the top. Again, this character looks like he's got a pretty cool mohawk. But I'm probably going to want to do a little bit of volumizing along the top here. So I'll move back into guide hairs mode. I'll work with these tips, with these 3 tips right here, and I'll have to do a bit of puffing. So I'll do a puff roots. Maybe I can even grab those hairs by the strand and give them a bit more volume this way. Let's pull these guys up a bit more. Maybe we'll work with the tip here. Now if I do one more freeze, back into render hairs mode. I don't want to be in display mode. There we go. Again, things aren't looking too bad. Maybe a little bit too lacking in volume at the back of the head. So again, just keep on moving back and forth between tips and strands mode, and try and lift some of these hairs a little bit higher off the back of the head. Go back into a render hairs mode. And if the hair is still a little too flat, which it does seem to be here, maybe I'll actually curl some of these tips up a little bit more at the back. Supposed to do something like that. We get a totally different interpolation to our hairs. These hairs now become a little bit too puffed out. So that's one of the tricks with hairs. You just have to keep on working at it to get the style that you really need. Let's try that. There we go. So now the style is starting to come along a little better. If I was now to go in and unhide the hairs at the side, let's put those into a render hairs mode. We're starting to get the look we're after. Now the last thing to do is to blend the results of the 2 parts together. So some of the hairs that make up the transition line between the side hairs and the top hairs are going to be combed down to comb over our seams. Last, we'll have to go in and work with the hairs themselves to add some randomness to the scale, the size, as well as add a little bit of curliness